Hello and welcome back to Porous Borders. This is episode 6 and this week is the first of 3 interviews I will be releasing in January highlighting the Jogja Noise Bombing Collective. If you've not heard of Jogja Noise Bombing before, they are a collective of noise and experimental musicians from Jogjakarta in Indonesia, and they've been getting a bit of attention in the last 3 or 4 years. They get their name from a style of performance that they call bombing, which means that they go out onto the streets and find somewhere with a spare electrical socket, and then they just play for whoever is around, I guess until someone comes and moves them along, or they get bored of playing and want to go home. I've seen them play quite a few times now on busier streets in Jogja, and it's a really weird experience. There are always a few people who are annoyed by what they're doing, but mostly people just come and watch and sort of look half confused and half interested. And one time I even saw them play on a public bus. They brought a battery-powered PA speaker onto the bus and just played this super harsh noise on the bus while the driver was making the stops and the inspector was selling the tickets and passengers were getting on and off. And it was a lot of fun and a very unique experience. So at the end of this month, at the end of January, Jogja Noise Bombing have their annual festival coming up on the 25th and 26th, and it's in Yogyakarta, and it's always a really big highlight of the year for me. I've been to 2 festivals now, so this year will be my 3rd. And there are just always all kinds of artists from different places playing, and the community is really amazing, and it's just incredibly fun. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I wanted to do something to kind of I guess just start to think about the festival this year. So with that in mind, today we have an interview with my friend Sean Stellfox. Sean is a noise musician who is originally from Delaware in the US, but for the past 5 years he's been based in central Java in Indonesia, and he's toured extensively and been very involved with the Jogja Noise Bombing Collective, as well as the Noise Bombing label and the band ASU as well. He also performs solo under the name Bossbattle, and sometimes as Stellfox, and in most of his work he's working with locally made and self-built synthesizers, and we don't get a chance to go into a huge amount of detail on that, but there'll be another episode where we talk about that in a bit more depth. Last year Sean co-authored the book Jogja Noise Bombing From the Street to the Stage, which is a kind of oral history about the Jogja Noise Bombing Collective. You can download it for free as an ebook or a PDF file from archive.org, and I will put a link to that in the show notes. It's in both English and Indonesian. In 2019, Sean and I also toured together in Japan and Hong Kong and Taiwan, and so we talk about that a little bit in the podcast as well. I'm going to play a little excerpt from a show we played in Kyoto that we mentioned in the podcast, which also has me playing guitar and an American musician called Kat Watley playing koto. But before I do that, I just have a little request. If you're enjoying the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or whatever else you use to get podcasts. And if you know anyone who would like the show, please share it with them. Okay, and that's it from me for this week. So here's my conversation with Sean.
East Coast.
East Coast.
Yeah, you were Boston.
Yeah.
I was Delaware.
Delaware. So
5 hours away, 6 hours away.
yeah. What was it like there?
Well, I mean, it's a small state to begin with. Like, so the whole state you could drive from the north to the south in about 2 hours, give or take. You know, small town America. Close enough to the big cities that, like, by the time I could drive, I was in Philadelphia and Baltimore, like, for gigs and hanging out. And, you know, I would remember, like, some high school afternoons going to, like, Chinatown and getting food with some friends and whatnot, or going to South Street, Philly, and, like, you know, then getting some cheesesteaks and whatnot. So, like, close enough to the cities that by the time you were able to get out, you were definitely ready to get out.
Yeah.
But also very small in that, like, everyone knows everybody. And, like, you don't really have that much like, you don't, your secrets aren't secret.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows what's up with what you're doing in the small area. So I think growing up there, it was definitely that kind of sheltered suburban. And if I think about it, like, I grew up in, like, a part of Delaware that is between the college city and the other city. I was, like, directly between suburbs, so I had a pretty sheltered, like, life for the most part for the first, like, 2 decades maybe of my life. It was pretty much, you know, staying locally and then going out to the cities for, like, what I would say would be, like, events and stuff, but not really venturing too far out of a comfort zone. It wasn't until, like, I was much older that I started to really just break my comfort zone.
When you went to see gigs, was it, like, mostly touring bands or local stuff as well?
Well, okay, so for gigs, it would be like a little bit of both because, like, if I went to Philly, of course, it was touring bands.
Right.
Like, I would go to the big venues. Like, at the time, they had, like, the TLA, the Trocadero, Electric Factory. And those were, like, either big band, depending on the size of the venue, big bands or small bands. Oh, and the church, the First Unitarian Church, Starlight Ballroom. I'm trying to think of some venues where I saw smaller bands. And those like the bands that I would go to see would be like the underground stuff. But then when I talk about like local Delaware, as a place that was on the corridor between four major cities, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C., we would get a lot of bands that would come through on a touring circuit that were still like maybe openers or underground that would pop through our city to play a gig on the way to maybe sell some merch or just kind of fill in a tour date. And like at that time we would get some like at the time that I would go to the shows, we would get bands that are huge now, but at the time they were just like starting up and coming through. Like I could remember seeing like Thursday before they were big.
Right.
Or Brand New before they were big.
Right, yeah.
Like those bands that are big now, and of course it was that early like 2000s emo scene that was really doing the touring. They would come through and play a set, and I even remember seeing some bands like they're not going to be anything, and then come to find out like they're headlining, you know, their own tours and super huge, and I was like, okay, I eat my hat right now because I'm completely wrong about that, but. I think it just would depend on the gigs that I would go to. Like, I think when I went to Philly a lot, it was definitely to see the bigger names because the smaller underground bands would be coming through our hometown.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like, those two bands, Thursday and Brand New. They were big in Australia when I was a kid in high school too.
Yeah.
But if they came and played, it would be like big festivals or like big club shows, I guess.
Well, and at the time that I saw them, it was like, if I can remember, maybe like 2000, 2001. So it was before they were like not like after maybe 2002, 2003, they would be playing the big festivals.
Yeah, right.
I was seeing them like right when they dropped their first album.
Okay. Yeah.
And they were on that like first tour.
Yeah,
so it was like, it wasn't like, you know, early.
Yeah.
It was just like they were right on the cusp of getting me. And there were so many bands that would come through that were right on the cusp, and then they would get, you know, break that barrier. And so it was kind of like that way. It was like if you want to stay local, there were like some local venues, and then occasionally not occasionally, but quite frequently, the local promoter would get in like a lot of good bands who were right on the cusp, or like if they had come as they were on the cusp, they would still come after they got big because they were like hanging out and like, oh yeah, dude, he's a cool dude. Let's like go and go play. It's one extra day between Philadelphia and Baltimore for them.
True.
So, you know, it wasn't really a big deal. But like I said, I think for Philadelphia, that's where early memories. That's where I saw a lot of Mike Patton. That's where I saw Godspeed for the first time. In like small venues. That's where I saw my first Noise. I didn't even realize who they were at the time, but I saw Black Dice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
When? What
they were
year?
opening for Godspeed You Black Emperor at the Starlight Ballroom. And I had no idea who Black Dice was at the time.
Like when they were still doing Noise as well.
Yeah.
Because they're not really
anymore,
doing noise anymore.
I saw them again in Baltimore probably 2012 maybe.
Okay.
No. 2009. It was, 2009 or 2010, probably 2009. I saw them again in Baltimore when they were kind of like in that transition. And I knew who they were at that time, but like I had no idea who they were, and I was just like, what's this? I didn't know Noise at the time.
Yeah.
And to come to think about it, like my first knowing Noise band to see was Black Dice. I guess I should say, like, going back.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know who they were, and I didn't know Noise at the time. I just knew Godspeed, and they had an opening act.
Yeah.
But it turns out it was them.
That's cool.
Yeah. I wish I knew who they were at the time, because I think I would have appreciated them better.
Yeah.
But that gig was a really crappy gig to begin with. It was in the middle of the winter.
Right.
And they made us wait outside for like a couple of hours. It must have been 2 or 3 hours waiting in the cold in a line before entering. So everyone was miserable.
Yeah. How did you start playing music?
I mean, if I go back to my early days, we could say 5th grade saxophone. Like, you get that first instrument.
Yeah.
But I only stuck with that for maybe about a year. And then 16, bass guitar. So I picked up a bass at 16, started taking lessons and learning, and then playing in bands, doing bass, and that followed me throughout until 2009. 2009, I would say, would be a turning point. 2008, 2009, because that's when I started to hang out more in Baltimore, and that's when I started to really see noise.
Okay.
Like I'd said before, I'd seen like noise acts, like Patton would bring people when he was touring, or I would see like Black Dice and not know who they were. But like 2008, 2009 was when I started to really like pay attention. And that's when I was like, oh, this is actually something. It's not just something random. So at that point, I had been done with bands. I had been in bands, and I had been done with the idea of playing with other people, because people suck. Like playing with other people you can get something really tight, but then the schedules don't work out, and practicing, and then you have to play gigs, and it's really hard to organize. Even if it's a duo, it's really hard to organize this stuff. So I said, why not just do my own thing? And I'd seen a bunch of acts in Baltimore doing their own thing. One notable act that everybody probably knows is Dan Deacon.
Okay, yeah.
He was really influential to me at the time, because here's one dude, and his control of a crowd is incredible. I'm not sure if you've ever seen him live.
I've seen him once. Yeah.
He does magic.
Yeah, when I saw him, he did this thing where he like opened up the fire exit, and he's like, everyone has to make a train outside and like run out through and come back in the entrance.
Like oh my God, the way he can control people.
Yeah.
It's like he's a cult leader.
Yeah.
And so like I would say between him and all the other like solo acts that I would see in Baltimore, there were a couple other notable acts that would do stuff that I was like, whoa, these people can do something by themselves and get a following. It's like, cool. So then at that time, I bought some synthesizers, like a groove box and a sampler. So I bought, my first sampler was SP404, which is like the standard sampler, and a Chaos Pad, the old KP3, Chaos Pad 3, and an Electribe, I forget which one. It was the blue one with the tubes, like EMS1 or something.
Yeah.
And that was like my first setup. And so that's when Bossbattle was born. And my first 2 years was just learning the equipment. I didn't even start playing live until after 2010. Like it was really, I can't remember my first live. Oh, I can't remember my first live gig, but it must have been after 2 years of having the gear. Like it took me a long time to learn the gear and to really feel comfortable before I would play out.
Right.
But then once I played out, it was just like continuous. And for a short period of time when I was playing out live, I had my friend Mel, who was the drummer of the jazz band I played in when I was in college. She played drums, I played bass there. I had her doing an electronic drum kit.
Okay.
And we would do like the songs that I would record, that I would produce on the groove boxes and the samplers. We would do that, but I would cut out all the drum stuff, and she would do the drums on an electronic drum kit. And it was really good. Like I mean, I felt like that was awesome, and I wish that she would have stayed playing with me more, but life.
Yeah.
Yeah. She had a job, and she also lived in Westchester, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So we would have to like meet up, or if we had gigs, we'd have to go and travel a lot. And I think what it came down to, it is just like what I said before. playing with people sucks because you have two different agendas, and if you're not on the same page, it's not going to work. And I don't mean any ill will against Mel or anything about that. I think we had some really good connections. It's just like she had a professional life and I had a professional life, and it just didn't match.
Yeah.
And so then I think I started doing solo stuff more, and then moved to Indonesia. And then I just started, and then Indonesia was when I really took more of a turn towards the noise.
Right.
And this is where my sound got really influenced more to the experimental side.
Okay.
Because in the U.S. it was more towards still like the chiptune-y, fast, punky kind of hardcore-y kind of stuff, but electronic, where it was like still melodies and beats and things that you could bob your head to, not so much the sound art. I mean, I still did that kind of stuff, but not to the extent that I do it here.
You've been here 5 years now?
Yeah.
So
right.
how did you end up coming here?
So I first came on so by profession I'm a teacher. By training I'm a teacher. I went to school to be a language teacher. And I came here on a fellowship from the Department of State. It's called the English Language Fellows, ELF for short. And they placed me. So essentially, I applied for a fellowship, and they placed people in like 250 different countries. The idea was you kind of don't really get to choose. They kind of place you where there's a need. And you do kind of get to vet a choice by saying, like, I would prefer these top 3 countries, but there's no guarantee. So ironically enough, my top 3 countries were Cambodia, South Africa, and Turkey.
Okay.
And if you think about it...
Why those countries?
Well, okay, so to start with Cambodia, because I've always had a fascination with Cambodia, and I've had some students from Cambodia that seem really cool, and I just thought, like, I feel like even now Cambodia is a place where you can really... There's just so much, like, there. It's such a small country, relatively speaking, but, like... It just seems like so rich with like culture, and the past of the genocide is really interesting in that like it's growing now. It's a young country and it needs help, you know? Yeah. So I thought Cambodia would be interesting for that because it needs people. Yeah. South Africa, because I had also, again, former students from South Africa, and I was really interested in its history, again, with apartheid, and kind of seeing what it was like to go to a place like in South Africa and see what the experience is like there. And then Turkey, because I felt Turkey is a perfect mix between Europe and Asia. It's like right there, and I really like students that I've met from Turkey have always been pleasant, great to work with, and the culture seems like something I would enjoy. So those 3 countries just kind of resonated with me in terms of like I could find myself doing something really cool here. And then, of course, I didn't get that. They chose Indonesia for me because there was a need to work in Indonesia. Right. And I feel like each of those countries has a little bit. Indonesia has each of those little bit of countries, though. It has its own histories that kind of match with that. And then at the same time, when I was doing my interview with the head of the Indonesian fellowship to find out which city I would be placed with, I talked about music and art as something I'm interested in. So they said, okay, well, we have a fitting in Jogjakarta. That's the center of art and culture for Indonesia. Would you be interested? And I said, sure. Like, I didn't know anything about Jogjakarta. I had only 3 students that I know of from Indonesia prior to coming here. And funny enough, I have met up with them since coming back to Indonesia in their hometown.
Right, okay.
So it's kind of cool. And then,
where were they from?
One was from... Samarang, the other Salatiga, the other is Papua.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So two really close and one.
Two
a
really
long
close,
way
one
away.
far away. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the fact that, but they had come to the school that I was teaching at the university. They were coming to the university on scholarships. I believe, I don't want to say this is for sure, but I believe they were on Fulbrights.
Okay.
If not Fulbrights, they were on some kind of Indonesia Department of State grant. They were on like a really nice, I believe it was Fulbright, but I could be wrong in that. But they were high scholars. They were working on their master's degree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got here 2015.
2014.
2014. And how did you connect with the scene here?
So I'm going to do a plug.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I
Yeah,
do a
of
plug?
course.
I'm going to plug the book that Indra Manus and I wrote. What is it? Jogja Noise Bombing from the Street to the Stage. You can find it if you Google archive.
Yeah.
And Jogja Noise Bombing.
Yeah,
It's
I'll
on
ask
the
you
internet.
about it later as well.
Yeah.
But,
But I wrote about this in my foreword, but I'll give you the summary for the listeners. And essentially, my first couple months living in Indonesia were kind of solitary. I didn't really know anybody, and I lived on Jalan Kalyurang, which is out of the big city, but still part of the DIY Jogjakarta. And it was the rainy season because I moved in February, so it was peak rainy season. So there's not a lot to do in the afternoon because it's downpouring. Once when it had broke, I had a bicycle, and I was riding my bicycle around, and I saw a dude with a skateboard, and I followed, and I stopped him at the light, and it's like, hey, where are you gonna go skate? I like skating, like let's see what's up. And so he's like, oh, just follow me. And so I went like not that far, and we went to a spot to skate where there were a bunch of people skating, and I got to meet up with the skaters, and then I went back a few times with my board and hung out with them a little bit. And then one of the dudes was into the underground scene, and I'd asked during the nongkronging, the hanging out sessions, like, hey, is there any place to like see live music? Prior to that, I'd only seen like reggae. Used to be a reggae bar on where Oxenfree is on that street. It's like a very touristy area, and I'd only seen like reggae bands.
Okay.
And I was just kind of like not into that. Reggae's fine, but it was like, how many times can you hear No Woman, No Cry? They played the same set every single night.
Okay.
Like it wasn't like enjoyable because it's like you see it once and you've seen it 100 times. Yeah. So I was just like, hey, is there any way to see original music? I want to see like, underground, punk, hardcore, anything really. And one of the dudes was like, yeah, there's this band, Sete Star Sep, who's coming from Japan, and they're playing here, and here's the information. It was hard for me to find at the time because the venue wasn't really well publicized, and Google Maps sucked at the time. So I finally found the venue and got to go to the gig, and it was your typical Indonesia gig where there's a variety of different genres playing all in the same gig. So it was like you start out with like your indie band, and then there's like this crazy grind band, and then sludge band, and then all sorts of stuff. And then was it Sulfur played? So like Krishna and Waru came out with their table of electronics, and they put it out. And at that time, everybody who was watching the gigs went out to have their cigarettes, except like 2-3 people who were into the noise. And I saw Sulfur. So my first noise act in Indonesia was Sulfur, which is awesome because they're the best. Yeah. And as they were doing it, Hilmi was filming, and he asked, oh, did you like that? I said, yeah, of course. I love noise. I came from a noise community back in my hometown. And he said, oh, cool, I want to introduce you to some people. So he introduced me to all the noise bombing people, like Ari, Indra was there, Adit, pretty much everybody who is still currently in Jogja Noise Bombing was there at the time. So I got introduced to them, and there was this dude Ranga. I don't know if you've ever met Ranga in Cherogul now. He's moved to Cherubim, but he is like a little angel. Oh my God, he's a saint. He's the nicest, sweetest guy. You have to go to Cherubim to meet him. He pretty much was like the dude who would tell me about when events were happening.
Okay.
And would pick me up on his motorbike and take me
Right.
to every event. So if it really wasn't for him, it's not to say that the other people wouldn't tell me about stuff, but he made sure that I knew something was happening and that I was there. Like other people would have been like Indra would tell me, hey, there's a gig happening here and here, like you should come if you want. Or other people would be like, hey, come to the gig, that's great. But he was like, hey, Sean, I'm going to pick you up in an hour. Are you ready? You know, that kind of thing. Yeah. And I was like, what? There's a gig tonight? I didn't even know. Yeah. Like, okay, great. Let's do it. Like, so like I have to give a shout out to Ranga. He's a sweetheart. And, that was pretty much how I got involved with Jogja Noise Bombing and how I started playing gigs with them.
So what's Jogja Noise? For people who don't know, what is Jogja Noise Bombing?
Well, I mean, it's gone through, it's what, 10 or 11 years old by now at this point. So it's gone through so many iterations. But originally it started out as a community of people who wanted to play noise or experimental music. But maybe 10 years ago, 11 years ago, like venues wouldn't have it because it wasn't a thing. And so they found that it was better to have guerrilla gigs on the street where they could just plug in and play rather than playing at venues where nobody would want them to play. And it's since evolved beyond that point to more of a community and a club where people who are into noise and experimental music can just kind of hang out, bounce ideas off of each other, collaborate with each other. I think at this point I've probably played with almost every single member in some kind of capacity, you know, so it's kind of a free-form collective of noise musicians. They call it Jogja Noise Bombing because the idea is it's like a graffiti bomb where you kind of spray your graffiti on a spot and move on. This is like you play your noise in a spot and move on. But it's so much more than that now. It's because I'm not sure whether the general audience is more accepting to noise because it's becoming more popular, or if the city itself is more accepting to the weirdness because there's more people behind it. It's more of a bigger collective that now like finding gigs or making gigs is not an issue, and there's actually more than one noise collective in Jogjakarta. Jogja Noise Bombing just happens to be one of the noise collectives and the one that tends to be more popular internationally, the one that puts on the annual festival, and I don't know, it has the name. It sounds cool.
Yeah.
Jogja Noise Bombing. It's like, whoa, boom, wow.
Were you here for the first festival?
I was. Yeah. Well, no. It depends on who you talk to.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to defer this question, but I believe if my history strikes me, the first festival was 2013 in December at Kedai Kebun Forum.
Okay.
And that had people like Saleh Sin from Singapore, and I can't think of the other people off the top of my head who played, but I remember that I saw a flyer for that, and I believe that is technically the first festival. Now, I was here for the other festival in 2014 that was 2 weekends, and they had, I couldn't make the first weekend because I had to work, but the second weekend, when Justice Yeldum from Australia, Edom Festival, DJ Sniff, DJ Urine, those dudes played. That was at the fried chicken shop.
Okay.
And that was more of the... I think that was some more notable festival that they talk about because it was like, yeah, we just played a noise show at a fried chicken shop.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool, right? Yeah. And so I think that festival, I think that was maybe the second festival, 2014. and then it's all a blur at this point.
Yeah.
I know I think it was 2016 I did not go to because I also had to work. That was the one when Bob Ostertag played and Time Ghost played, and that was also like a really memorable festival, but I couldn't make it to that because I was in Bukittinggi for work. But other than that one and the 2013 one, I've been at every festival. Yeah.
Have you played at most of them as well?
I've played at every festival except 2013 and 16.
Okay.
I wasn't even here at 2013, and 2016 I had to work. But I played in some capacity.
Yeah.
I played at every festival.
So how did getting involved with noise bombing change what you were doing musically? Because you said before you were doing something a little different.
I think it changed my whole approach to how I perceive music and how I perceive performance. So, like we'll talk about what I was doing in the United States as Bossbattle was more chiptune-y, inspired by some chiptune artists I had seen and other Baltimore musicians. And kind of being influenced by the showmanship of that scene, and then trying to do something more appealing to a crowd, something that would get people moving and dancing, and then moving to Indonesia, seeing people who aren't really taking into consideration the audience in the attitude of, do I want people moving and dancing, or but more like, I have a message and I have something to say and I need to get something out, and this is my frustration, these are my anxieties, and this is how I need to get it out. I think that really helped influence my sound. I think the performance aspect of many Indonesian noise musicians really influenced the way I interact with the crowds. Not so much, what am I trying to say? It's not so much trying to get them to move, but more or less trying to get them to feel a different type of emotion. I think also like just the idea of always trying to do something different. Because in Indonesia, it's always the next thing. And even Jogja Noise Bombing is looking at like, what is the next thing? It's like, okay, great. We did street performance. We did festivals. How else? We've done workshops. What is always the next level? And so it's always, for me, it's like pushing what is the next level. And that's when I start to try to find, something that nobody else is doing, or something that not many people are doing, and trying to do that.
You started the noise bombing label. Did that start before you were here, or were you part of that at the beginning?
So the noise bombing label is Indra Manus and myself, and it really came as an idea that there's so many good noise musicians that we know, both people that are in the community and people who have come through festivals or playing gigs or something, that we just want to give a platform for people to play. So originally it started out as a platform for Indonesian and other noise music for people to listen to and to spread. And I said, let's use it. Let's use the noise bombing, because that's what we are. Let's do it. And then working with Indra has been really great about that, because there will be times where he says, hey, I want to release this album. Can we do it on noise? Sure, no problem. Hey, I want to release this. Let's just use it on noise bombing, because there's other there's other labels that are from noise bombing people, like Ari, one of the founders of noise bombing, Jogja Noise Bombing, has Mind Blasting net label. Yeah. So I don't want to and then
Rio has 10 p.m. project.
Rio has 10 p.m. project, and Hilmi has his own project. So everybody has their own labels. Even Indra has his own other labels, but I just thought like, the name Noise Bombing resonates with people outside of Indonesia. Like even inside Indonesia, it resonates, and we should like utilize it. And so like I like to think of it as it's not my label. I just happen to have established the name and contact people. But like I said, it's really open because Indra will contact me and say, hey, we're going to put out this act. Great, no problem. Just send me the files and I'll get the cassettes printed. I'll get the CDs printed. I'll do all the hard work because I enjoy doing that stuff. I enjoy doing it. So it's also kind of like a passion project for me. But in terms of like curating it or anything, it's pretty flexible. It's pretty open, and it's a collaboration. It's not just myself.
So what are some of the releases you've done so far?
We've done a ton of release. Well, I think we're at 20 now. So we're.
And how long's it been running now?
3 years, maybe.
Okay.
I think.
That's pretty respectable in 3 years.
Some of the ones that really stick out to me is early on we did like the sounds of. So we have Sounds of Samarinda, which is all the like city in Kalimantan people like Serena, Theo. Yeah, these are compilations. We have Sounds of Sumatra, or not Sumatra, sorry, Sounds of Sulawesi, which is really cool because we have one act on there who passed away recently, maybe 2 years ago. He's since passed, so it's kind of nice that we were able to capture that person's sound. What else do we have? We've got some collaborations between Jogja Noise Bombing people, of course. We've got the first Indonesia, I don't know if it's the first, but it's definitely the first I know about, the first noise hip-hop, which is Indra Manus and Joe Millionaire.
Okay, yeah.
That's released on there, so it's like got that like clippings, death grips kind of hip hop noise thing going for it. What else did we release? I think I did Jogjakarta. I think I put that out. Yeah.
So that's Ruli's choir project, right?
Yeah. No. Ruli's band project.
Ruli's band project.
Yeah, Jogjakarta, not Jogjakarta. Yeah, so it's like the choir project, but with instruments.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know, it's a system of improvisation, right? Developed by Ruli from Senyawa, and he kind of is a conductor in the acts as a conductor, and people follow his lead, right?
Yep. And that was recorded over 2 days, 2 sessions. Like one day was a set of musicians, and like everything recorded on there was his like way of conducting them. Like he wrote the parts for each musician, and then the second day he did the same thing but with a whole new set of musicians.
Right.
And we did the cassette release of that. We did Malikat Dan Zoo, which is Arrington and the guys from Zoo and Maong, which was really fun because that was one done in solo, which I self-plug, but I played on, and we did like this really like weird set at the Mora Market where it was like in front of a bunch of high school kids, and they weren't really there for experimental. They wanted like the band that was doing Led Zeppelin covers to keep playing, but like they were into it, And then the next day was in where is it? Ponorogo, where we did like this trance dancing ensemble, and it's like Arrington playing his saxophone over these like trance dancers, and it was really cool, and that's captured on cassette. And then recently we have put out this really cool thing called Local Time, which is the plan is it's going to be a continuous compilation, and right now we have Local Time green and blue, so it's different colors as we're calling it, and it's international noise artists from all over the world with one unifying theme is that they are female or female identifying. And we have a couple Australians on there. We have Furchick from Perth and Carla Orai from Melbourne that is on there, and then some Indonesians. We have Filipino artists. I'm trying to think of who else. American, Swiss artists, a couple London artists. Yeah. It's kind of like the idea is that it's, we're just going to reach out to as many female or female identifying artists and continue to put out, maybe the next time it will be local time red, local time yellow, something like that.
I think some Japanese people on there too, right?
Yeah. Yuki's on there, and Kat. Yeah. Kat's on there as well.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you what it was like. You've toured here a lot, right? What was it like doing the first couple of tours here?
Okay, so remembering back 2014, I started playing in Jogja first, and I played. It was really kind of like the time that I was here, I was constantly playing Jogja, because any like noise gig, there were definitely enough noise artists for gigs, but like not to the level they are now. Now there's so many noise artists, which is a great thing. But at the time, it was much more like trying to fit a bill with everybody.
Right.
So like a lot of the people who haven't played in a long time now were playing like every weekend. And so like I was playing about the same. It was like continuously playing because there would be a gig, and it was like, oh, let's play.
So who else was playing a lot around then? Indra Manus?
Indra Manus, Anxiety, Ari.
Yep.
Let's see who else. Hillman had his thing, Palasic. I'm trying to remember who else at the time. Oh, of course, Soda Dosa played a ton.
Right.
Sulfur played a ton. Yeah, it was just like all the time there would be gigs. And if it wasn't a gig, it was like a noise bombing. And that was the other thing. It was like, so I think one thing, going back to a previous question, was like, what did I learn? I also learned how to minimize my setup. Because if you're doing a noise bombing, you don't want a lot of gear. You want like very minimal gear so you can pick up and move for whatever reason.
So you did a lot of bombing gigs around that time too?
Yeah, there were definitely more bombings than there are now. Not to say there aren't a lot now, but it was just like, that was more like at that time, that's the thing that people did. That we did more bombings because the gigs weren't there, or if we did gigs, it was like at a coffee shop with a practice amp. It was before the YK booking community. So the YK booking community is pretty much the same people that are Jogja Noise Bombing, but they have saved up some money and bought a backline of drum kits and guitar amps, and now whenever they need to host gigs, they have their own backline. Maybe for the listeners, it's helpful to know that in Indonesia, you don't really provide your own backline. Like the organizers provide a backline. So guitar amps and drums are pretty much provided from the organizers. And before the YK booking guys bought their own backline, they would have to rent out. So anytime you want to have a gig at a coffee shop or anywhere, you'd have to rent out a bunch of amps, and that's expensive. So the idea was buy your own backline and then rent out your own backline when you're not using it. So YK Booking has their own backline, and so that made things a lot easier to have gigs, because now all you have to do is find a spot, like a coffee shop or a restaurant or anywhere that would be willing to let you play music, which is different than, say, Australia, where you have dedicated music venues.
Yeah.
So in Indonesia, it's a lot of like finding a spot. There are, of course, dedicated music venues for bigger bands, but like what we're doing doesn't have a dedicated venue as much. Or if it does, it's a lot to rent out. So like, yeah, you go to a coffee shop and say, hey, we want to put a gig on here. This is how many people we can bring. These are we'll have the back line. And then now that they have a back line, it's easier to just have gigs versus street. Right. That helps. So I think like, yeah, and when I started touring, to go back to the question, there wasn't a dedicated back line other than a few people's practice amps. So it was easier to just do more street gigs or like at college campuses and stuff when they would have like music nights or something. Also, like all my friends at the time were still in college, you know, they were still studying. So their college would be having like maybe an open mic kind of thing, and we would just do noise at the open mic.
Right, yeah.
You
Did
know,
that confuse some people?
absolutely. But it brought out some of the coolest people that I ever met, because I met Baby Takaka at the first one of those, and I met like a lot of people who were really into like what we were doing.
Yeah.
For people that don't know, Baby Takaka is also like a noise act. They're kind of like Indonesia's Animal Collective.
Right.
They're kind of like chilled that way, and they were art students from the local art college who were like doing experimental music, and still are really killing it. And I got to meet them at one of those open mics. But like when I saw Baby Takaka play at one of those, they got booed
Right.
by the band that wanted to do Guns N' Roses covers. So I mean, it really.
I've still never seen something that impolite at a gig in Indonesia.
Well, this is college kids.
Yeah,
And it's like, you know, college kids are a completely different crowd.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like an open mic thing there, and they're like, "No, we want to play Guns N' Roses. We don't care about this experimental crap."
Yeah. Where is the first place you played outside Jogja?
Ooh, I can't remember, but I want to say maybe Surabaya or Solo.
Okay.
Probably Solo with DJ Urine and Idem Festival as part of the like touring for the Noise Festival. But I also remember finally playing Surabaya, having a good gig there. Surabaya was a fun gig. Early on, I think it was definitely either Solo or Surabaya. I can't remember which one came first, but those were fun. And then, of course, I played a whole bunch of other places throughout since then. But one of my more favorite gigs was definitely Jakarta.
Right.
Jakarta was wild.
Who did you play with there?
I played with all the classics. I played Raymond Red, Individual Distortion, Taman, Enik Taman Safari. I can't even remember. But like, I played with. It was at Mondo.
Okay.
At the rooftop, which is a legendary venue that's since shut down.
Yeah.
And I played only 3 pedals with my feedback belt, and like moshing, being pushed into the crowd. Like it was definitely like, and everyone was like drunk off their faces.
Yeah.
So like I've got some really good footage out there of like people just going sloppy during their sets.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. Like Jakarta really had a great time playing in Jakarta, and I always would love to play. I haven't played since. I think I only played Jakarta once. Been back a bunch of times, but I've only played one time, and I should play again because like I had a great time. They're awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first gig I ever saw in Indonesia was in 2014 in Jakarta.
Oh yeah.
And it was a studio gig, and I can't remember all the bands that played, but the 3 that played that I remember were Vague, the Cuda, and Individual Distortion. And I remember that show so well because everyone was kind of like sitting on the floor for his set, but between all of the songs, everyone would just yell things and insult him.
Yeah. I love Jakarta for that. Like Jakarta people don't give a fuck. Yeah. Like compared to people in Central Java, people in Jakarta are rude. Yeah. Well, they're not. They don't have that politeness. Yeah. They don't have that Central Java politeness where they just kind of like say what's on their mind, because it's a big city. It's New York, you know. New Yorkers are rude in that same way because they don't have the time to deal with politeness. And Jakarta people are the same way. I love it. Yeah. It's fantastic. That's why I think I had such a great set, because like while people do tend to drink in like Central Java and Jogja and stuff, like maybe it's a little bit of Chio here and there, or it's a little bit of Salak Pando or a little Angka Merah, but it's not like getting shit-faced. Yeah. But in Jakarta, like, it was just pounding the beer and the whiskey. And, like, I was drunk. Everyone was drunk. And it was, like, I go back to the footage I took at that gig, and, yeah, this was a good time.
So when did you start playing overseas? What was your first tour?
I mean, outside of Indonesia would probably be 2014, and I think I did, oh my god, why is it so cloggy? I can't remember. No, I totally, I know it was Singapore was my first outside of Indonesia, outside of US gig, and then from Singapore, I feel like I played, it wasn't Japan right away. Oh my god. It wasn't KL either, because I didn't do KL until way later, which it makes no sense because it's so close. I want to say it was Singapore. Maybe it was Singapore, New Zealand.
Okay.
I think it may have been that. Or maybe it was, yeah, that would have made sense. Because I did a weird thing where I went back to the U.S. and then I went from the U.S. to New Zealand. But I don't think I played with people, but I didn't really play any gigs in New Zealand my first time. It wasn't until my second time. So then let's just say, all intents and purposes, we'll say maybe 2015, Japan, Taiwan, Kuala Lumpur. I think that may have been one of the first really bigger tours that I had done.
And where else have you been? Cambodia, right?
I did all ASEAN countries except Brunei and Maldives, and Laos. I did go to Laos, but I didn't play Laos. So we'll say, let's talk about one of my more memorable tours. I'll call it my Beautiful Hell tour. Okay. Because that was the album I had recently released, was called A Beautiful Hell, and that was the idea between that was 7 countries, 7 weeks. So I took my time. I was kind of a tourist as well, but I did Singapore, Malaysia, Burma, Thailand. So that's what, 4? Thailand. And then I went to Laos but didn't play. And then Vietnam, Cambodia. 4. And then I went back to Malaysia, from Cambodia to Malaysia, and then back to Indonesia. And I played the next day coming back in Indonesia. So, it was like 7 countries, 7 weeks. And that was an amazing tour because it was just like, I don't know, man. It's just so much, so many emotions going on at the time. Highs and lows, and beautiful sights, and delicious food, amazing communities. At that time, when I was in Cambodia, I had met back up with 3 Jogja Noise Bombing acts who were touring. It was Akbar, Gendes, and Rio. So they were also on what they called their Merdeka tour, their independence tour. And they played Cambodia, Thailand, and Malaysia. And so I met up with them from the Cambodia side. I skipped Thailand, met up with them again in Malaysia. So together we did Cambodia, Malaysia, and then home. And when we did Malaysia, we did like Penang and Kuala Lumpur. So we did a little bit of touring there. And that was an amazing tour. Yeah.
So you mentioned Gendes. You recently, in the last couple of years, started a band with.
Well, I
him?
didn't start a band with him.
Yeah.
But there is a band with people that look like us.
Yeah. Okay.
We manage a band.
Yeah.
We manage this band called Asusa. And so Asusa is a band from Venus. And it's like these couple of beings who kind of are magnetic characters, and they bring in other people to play with them and do an improv set. But we manage them. They kind of look like us, you know, but we're not them.
Yeah. When did that band start?
That started, well, we were first visited by them in Penang, Malaysia, on the Independence Tour. For their Independence Tour, My Beautiful Hell Tour, they had came down from their flying saucers and said, hey, can you put us on the bill for this Penang show? And we said, well, we're supposed to play. And they said, it's okay, we'll play instead of you. And I said, okay, sure, no problem. So they did that for the Penang and the Kuala Lumpur show. I mean, they were so rude. They just said, hey, we're going to take over your KL show as well. So but
Venusian manners.
Yeah, well, they were kind of nice, but they just took over our bodies. Let's just say it that way. We were possessed. And so, yeah, that would have been 2016, 17? I can't remember now. 17, I think. Yeah, and then, so Asusa has since come to reside in Indonesia and has been playing a handful of festivals and gigs all around Indonesia. Getting quite a good response, and it's actually like a trio. There's this other artist. She's a dancer named I can never say her name, but it's like Zuka Belazar, and she is a dancer from Venus and does a lot of experimental dancing, and she wears this synthesizer that triggers her body movements. So when she moves, the sound of her movements is also reacting to what she's doing.
Right. So recently that band played Art Jog, right?
Art Jog, yeah.
Art Jog is a annual art exhibition, festival, month-long event that happens in Jogja. So that's quite a big deal, right? Was that one of the bigger shows?
Yeah, that was a big deal for Asusa. So as the managers for Asusa, we had to kind of figure out like what were the requirements and what we needed to do in order to help them, and so they needed time because it was like I think from 3:00 in the afternoon until into the night they were playing nonstop. So they wore their bodysuits, which trigger synthesizing sound, and they walked the entirety of the tourist district of Malioboro wearing their bodysuits. And so I think it was 3 hours. They even got on public transportation and were on the bus.
Like
playing
as part of the performance.
As part of the performance, they were playing. They were wearing their bodysuits on the bus with the amplifiers plugged in and just making noise on the public bus while people in the bus were just annoyed. And then walking down the tourist districts and going in front of the Sultan's Castle and playing in front of the Sultan's Castle. And then taking a becak. A becak is like a rickshaw, but that's a bicycle. And having like a becak driver drive them to the venue. And then after they got to the venue, then they like kind of plugged in and played on the stage. It was like maybe a 3 to 5 hour performance total. And it was a lot of fun to manage them for that. Because, there was a lot of moving and puzzle pieces that needed to be put together, and they're Venetians. They're terrible when it comes to sound checking and being professional. So like we had to sound check for them. We had to set up all their gear and roadie for them because they weren't ready to come out. So we, it was an all-day event just in order to play, but it was a lot of fun to be a part of that, and it was an honor for Art Jog to recognize experimental music in that capacity, to allow it a space on their main stage, and to like even during the street performances and the bus performance and the Baycheck performances, that stuff was being live streamed to the Art Jog venue. So it was being live streamed on like a YouTube feed and then being projected, so people who were coming to the art gallery during the day were seeing the live stream of what Asusa was doing, which was kind of cool. And that live stream is still available online. I think the manager for the dancer, she runs a dancing company called ASU Permadata, and her YouTube channel was streaming it. So like she pretty much manages that dancer. Yeah, and it's on her channel. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So the basic format of that band is drums and modular synth, right? But it takes a lot of different other
it takes different forms.
Yeah.
So like in its foundation, it's drums, modular synth, and a dancer. But it takes other forms in like feedback noise, spring noise, body synthesizer, which is like where the members will wear different contact points that trigger synthesizing sounds based on their movement.
Yeah, that's cool. I have seen that band play a bunch, and every show is different. And
yeah,
is that a goal, or is that just kind of you get bored and you want to do something else every time?
Oh, I think it's an improv troupe.
Yeah.
And so Asusa is an improv thing where like every single time is going to be different because it wants to keep the audience on the toes.
Yeah.
They don't want to do the same thing every single time because that would just be boring.
Yeah. So earlier this year, you put out a book about which we were talking about before.
I plugged it earlier.
Yeah. So it was for the 10-year anniversary of Jogja Noise Bombing, right?
Yeah. True.
So what was the book and what was the idea behind it?
Okay, so the book is called Jogja Noise Bombing from the Street to the Stage. It's available online on archive.org. You can just find it. Google it. You'll find it. And it's a free PDF. The idea behind the book was that it was a 10-year anniversary of Jogja Noise Bombing. I had only been involved for the 5 years, so there were 5 years that I wasn't involved with. But I felt like there was a story that needed to be told, and the best way to tell it was to have the artists and people who had interacted with us for the last 10 years to tell it. So the way the book is divided, there's a few forwards by myself and Azif, who helped edit, where we kind of gave our perspective of joining the community and what it was like to be an outsider being accepted inward. And then there was a chapter by Indra Menus where he discussed the history of noise in Jogja, because it goes beyond Jogja Noise Bombing. It goes back to the 90s. And there are noise acts that were part of larger bands. There were noise acts that were part of the art communities and solos. So he included those. And then we decided, we thought that it's best that each member provides their own biography and answers a few questions that we surveyed them about, so they could kind of tell about who they are and what inspires them to do noise, maybe what they use. So that way, if somebody wants to read more about like who are the members of Jogja Noise Bombing, they can read their biography. They can read their responses to these questions. The idea was kind of like to make it like a zine, but a book. So it's kind of like a zine interview, but in a book format. After that, we then interviewed people who had been instrumental in interacting with us for the last 10 years. Some really big names, people like Walter Rock and Tim, who had been around since the beginning. And then people like Individual Distortion, who were big in the Indonesian noise community, period. And then people who had toured through Indonesia but had left an impact on us, people like Bob Ostertag, Noor. We interviewed a bunch of people who were involved in our scene and just asking them, what do you think about what we do? And where do you think we get our inspiration? And it was interesting to see what some people thought and how some people viewed what we're doing, because some people saw it as maybe a form of political protest. Some people saw it as a form of self-expression. Some people saw it as, yeah, this is just what you do in Indonesia. This is what you do in Jogja.
Yeah.
So it like different perspectives have different views on what we're doing. And I think that's kind of the fun part about the whole thing is there's no definitive thing saying we do this because we just have fun.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that actually, because I remember when one time I was talking to a friend in Australia who's not like a experimental music person at all, but she was kind of curious about what was going on here. And so I was telling her about noise bombing, and after I'd kind of explained what it was, the first thing she said was, "Oh, so it's political." And I remember at the event when you guys launched the book, Indra said something like, "It's not political, we're just trying to have fun." Yeah.
Well, I think, okay, when it comes down to it, and so this always gets me in trouble, and it even got me in trouble at the book launching because I don't see it as political. Indra doesn't see it as political, but when we had the book launching, Azif made a good point. And he said, essentially, well, when you think about it, the reason that you were playing shows on the street, like the reason it originally started that way was because venues would be afraid that you would blow up their speakers because they didn't have the money to do it. And it's because the economy was not so strong. And so he said everything goes back to politics.
Yeah.
But when I view it as political, when I view something as political, I'm thinking in the form of political protest.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily anti-government in the way that like a political protest like in Hong Kong would be. I don't think people go out and say we're against we're going to play noise this way to go against the Indonesian government. So it's not really political in that respect. It's not a form of political protest. If people want to attach politics to it, they may, because that might be what they see it as. However, the intention of it is just to express yourself and play noise. With that said, there has been some recent protests in Indonesia within the last month, and there has been a couple of noise communities who have played at the protests doing noise on the street at the protest. So that case, it does become political against a certain agenda. However, Jogja Noise Bombing itself has always said, like, yeah, we're just in it for fun, even if what Aziz has said at the book launching does make a lot of sense. It is a form of protest, but it's a form of protest because you can't play at these venues. So I see it in that way. Yeah, okay, maybe you could argue it's political, but I don't see any of the noise bombing acts, or at least up until this point, I haven't seen any of the noise bombing acts going out to political protests saying we're against the government and we're going to play noise.
Yeah, so there's no particular agenda to it.
In that regard. That regard. It might be political in its foundation, subconsciously. But like up front, it hasn't really been pushing in a political agenda in that regard. So that got me in trouble because I like when I had made a comment that like, well, it's always been about counterculture. It's always been about we're not, venues wouldn't let people play. You wanted to play. You said, forget you, I'm going to play on the street. Instead, that doesn't seem political. And then Aziz says, oh, no, actually, it can be considered political. Okay, I attest. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with you when you think of it that way. But when I think of it as when I think of politics, I think of protests.
Yeah.
And I don't see it as that yet. It doesn't mean to say that some of these guys might not turn it into something that way. But at this point, it hasn't become that.
Yeah. I'm curious, for someone who's been here for a pretty long time now, you've been here half a decade, what's it like when you go back to the States? Like, I guess personally, but in terms of music and playing back there as well, like what are the differences you notice?
I can't really answer that question because it's been 3 years since I've been back to the States. So I've actually been to Australia sooner than I have been back to the States. So I can't really answer that question, unfortunately. I will be going back for about a week in January, in January 2020, for my sister's wedding.
Yeah.
So, but even then, it's only going to be a quick week, and I'm planning maybe to play a gig in San Francisco with Kat.
Okay.
Because she's studying there now.
Yeah. But
that may or may not happen. I'm not. It's still too early to organize.
Yeah. And I guess that's you haven't been back post-Trump.
No, I haven't, and that's been and I will go on record saying that's been intentional.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be going back if my sister wasn't getting married, but family over everything else, family first. So gotta love your family, and that's important.
Yeah.
But
well, maybe I could ask you, what you played in Australia a little bit, in New Zealand. What are some of the differences you noticed playing there between playing here?
I think in the West, we'll say West, kind of. I don't know. It's really hard because, like, when I was in Australia, I did end up seeing an Indonesian band. I saw what's the name? Nova and Palestine.
Philistine and Nova.
Philistine and Nova.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah,
oh my God, they're amazing. I ended up seeing them in Australia, but I did end up seeing what was the band? It was a hip hop group called Combat Wombat.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh my God, they were fun.
Yeah.
They were good. And then I played and then I saw the Make It Up anniversary. I think it was 10 year, or was it 10?
Okay.
10 year or 25 year? I don't remember.
I don't know.
I saw the Make It Up club anniversary, and that was really cool because, like, I saw Justice Yeldum and Lucas Abela and Robin Fox playing together.
Wow, together?
I think it was a blur, but I think they were. I think they were on the same bill. I think they were at the same night.
That's a very strong lineup.
Yeah. But when I would say in Australia, what I noticed was that it was definitely, I guess it's all the same, really. There was your experimental communities, and then I went to the gigs that I went to in Australia were definitely, like, I could see Indonesians doing the same gigs, like a radio gig, and seeing, like, those kinds of bands that you would, like, indie pop and things like that. I think maybe the big difference would be the way people are, in terms of, like, less of a drinking culture. But that's kind of a stupid response.
Yes and no. I think I've been thinking about that a lot myself, like, since I've been back, and it's just interesting how so much of music is centered around that one activity in Australia compared to here, and you really notice it being here for a long time. I mean, you're there to help the venue sell drinks in Australia. I think, and that's not a thing here.
People don't care about drinking or smoking weed because smoking weed puts you in jail forever, and drinking is maybe some people will have a little bit of, like, local moonshine stuff, but for the most part, people won't have beers around at gigs, except in, like, maybe Bali and Jakarta.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's about the music.
Yeah, and people come. I guess you get like you kind of have more of the walk-in kind of thing happening in Australia, maybe.
Yeah.
Like people here, if they go to a gig, they know what they're going to.
That's a
before.
very good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here it's like you get the same people that are there for the music, not the walk-in. that reminds me of our gig in Osaka.
Yeah.
Remember when we played Osaka
Yeah.
and there were the old dudes who got in a fist fight?
Yeah.
Oh my god, that was hilarious. They were just like there.
Yeah.
We should
I've told that story a few times going back.
That was deep Osaka, man.
Yeah.
And then sleeping on a floor full of cockroaches and oh my god. What was the kid's name? Suzuki?
Yeah, Suzuki. That's
Right.
right.
Gendes was like, I'm Tonka.
Yeah.
Or I'm Yamaha.
Yeah.
Oh my god. So we played a gig in Osaka where it was Gendes, myself. We were touring as the managers for Asusa. Our friend Kat, who lived in Japan, was on tour with us, and Andrew as well, playing his solo set. And the first time we all met up in Osaka, and I was sleep deprived after flying in and not sleeping. Andrew, what was your story? You had come in the day before?
I flew in the night before, yeah.
Yeah. Gendes took a bus from Tokyo, and Kat took the bullet train.
Yeah.
And Gendes had to carry these big suitcases, or this big duffel bag full of sleeping bags. It was like bigger than a person.
Yeah.
And so we arrived in oh, I'm having a coughing fit. So we arrived in Osaka, and got no sleep. Went straight to pretty much got some food and went straight to the gig, and sound checked. And it was a really cool gig. It was run by a really cool group of non-typical Japanese people, full body tattoos.
Yeah.
Lots of facial piercings, not your typical Japanese people. And so we played this gig, and it went on until, I don't know what time, maybe 1 or 2. We played our sets, and then we did an after party. Yeah. And that was a lot of fun. But as we were playing, the way the bar was separated, there was the performance space was separated by doors, soundproof doors, and the bar was on its other side, and there was a group of about 4 older men, gray hair not grandpas, maybe uncles, who were drinking. Yeah. And after Asusa played a set, we were going out to the bar area to take our gear off. They were going out to take their gear off and everything, and all of a sudden there was a fist fight between the four uncles, and they were fully punching the crap out of each other, and they were yelling at each other. And Kat, who's lived in Japan her entire life, was able to translate, and she's yeah, that was not they were really angry at each other. And so after the fist fight, we ended up doing an after party with everybody until maybe 2 or 1. We tried to get some sleep on the floor, couldn't, because the lights did not turn off at the venue. They did not turn the lights off to let us sleep. And there was the sound engineer, the husband and wife who were doing the sound, had a little kid who was, I don't know how old he was, maybe 5?
Yeah, 5 at the most.
5 at the most, 4 or 5. Yeah. And his name was Suzuki, and he was just talking with our friend Gendes all night. And Gendes speaks Japanese. Yeah. So they were talking in Japanese, and he was teaching Suzuki Indonesian. Yeah. And Andrew and I are trying to sleep while cockroaches are crawling over our faces, and Suzuki and Gendes are just talking. And it's I don't think I got a single hour of sleep that night. Oh God, it was terrible, but it was also great.
Yeah, it was a nice introduction to weird Japan.
And I love Osaka.
Yeah,
and that was deep Osaka.
Yeah,
Kat was you can't get any more deep Osaka than this. It was really hardcore Osage. It was a lot of fun. Shout out to Julie for organizing that show. She was amazing. And she's a good buto dancer as well.
Yeah.
Oh my God, her dancing was incredible.
Yeah.
I love that after. I think my favorite part was the after party.
Yeah.
Her and Kat, when they did their Buto and Koto together. Oh my God, that was
and
incredible.
And that was the rapper guy who played with you.
Yeah, the rapper who played with me was a lot of fun. Yeah. I love that after party. I wish I got some sleep though.
Yeah.
Because then we had to play in Kyoto the next night, and that was rough. That was a good gig too,
but
though.
Fun. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Karaoke late at night.
Yeah, it's one of those gigs that I've had a couple of those gigs before where you just are not expecting anything good from it.
Yeah.
And it turns out to be one of the funnest shows you've played.
Kyoto?
Yeah.
Kyoto was definitely the best.
Yeah.
We played a really good gig, and you played with us, Usa, which was really cool. Well, you managed the person who played with us, Usa.
That's right.
Yeah. And then we ended up like just drinking homemade sake and doing karaoke. It was so wild.
Yeah. And we got to go to sleep. That was good.
And we got a good night. But that bus ride from Kyoto, from Socrates, the venue, to the bullet train, the looks we got from the old people was... Kat was just like she was like, oh my God, if you only knew what they were saying about you.
Yeah.
They were talking so much trash on us. And we must have smelled so bad.
Yeah.
I had gone 3 days without a shower at that point.
Yeah, being stinky experimental musicians on
Yeah.
a commuter bus.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Porous Borders. If you're interested in exploring more underground music from the Asia-Pacific region, you can check out my YouTube channel, Concrescence Records. You can find the link to that in the show notes. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review in the iTunes store. If you have suggestions or feedback and you want to get in touch, you can email the show at porousborders@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at @ANDRWMH.